Hey guys! Today we're going to delve into all the Easter eggs, references, and details you might have missed in episode 4 of X-Men 97, second half of the episode. Episode 4 was split into two parts. Motendo, where the main character is Jubilee. Amazing episode which I created an exclusive video covering all the references and Easter eggs. So after finishing this video, go and watch it. And Life and Death, a famous comic book story that we're going to look into in today's video. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video to stay updated. Your likes and subscriptions contribute to the growth of the project. And as the project grows, I'll be able to make more interesting videos for you. Agreed? Thanks for the support. Moving forward, as is customary on our videos, we're going to examine the opening, which always contains never before seen scenes. We see Forge from the episode Cold Comfort. We see Forge in a few episodes of the original series. Is usually a future version of him, the one who invented the time travel device that sent Bishop into the past. Speaking of Bishop, he no longer appears in the opening credits, so I think his main purpose on the show was to stick around until baby Nate needed to go to the future, but we see the present Forge a few times in the original series. First in that episode Cold Comfort, where he reveals to the X-Men that he's leading a government team of superheroes called the X Factor, which we also see a picture of in this episode. Don't worry, I will comment on it. By the way, I liked how they are drawn exactly like Larry Stroman drew them in the original comic. As I pointed out last week, he and Xavier gave no indication that they knew each other in that episode. Forge was also a key character in the 2-episode arc Felix, where he helps Beast to stop an alien invasion in that episode where Morlock becomes his leg. We also see a scene of Xavier spying on the Hellfire Club. The group of mutant supervillains responsible for unleashing Dark Phoenix in the 3rd season. They were also mentioned in this newspaper in episode 1, speaking about the Hellish Gala. Now the loading screen is the wall of the classic cover of X-Men 141, Days of a Forgotten Future, where Wolverine stands in front of a wall of murdered mutants. And actually the wall aligns exactly with the comics. There is a subtle connection here with the 2nd episode, Life and Death. The natives of Genosha wear control collars to neutralize the mutants' powers. These same collars were used to make the Executor's weapon, and it turns out that Forge had a role in the invention of this technology. But there's another connection here with Apocalypse and BB-8, which I will address later in the video, about devices that can be used to neutralize danger, and that leads us to Life and Death, Part 1. Now this is adapting one of the greatest, most classic issues of comics ever. In the last edition, a weapon Ford invented takes away Storm's powers. He saves her from drowning and takes her back to his apartment filled with holographic images. This was a unique edition since it halted the ongoing story to focus on Storm feeling depressed and suicidal following the loss of her powers. It showcased large panels with no dialogue, certainly not the style of the period. There are numerous parallels between the comics and the installment that I'll highlight as we progress. For instance, she's wearing these dungarees as she does in the comics. Initially, she wore a ruched dress to impress Ford, but later felt uneasy and reverted to her usual attire. This also mirrored the current storyline of Storm in the comics, and the series as well. She always embodied a royal demeanor and maintained composed emotions. In the Storm's own words, I have to keep my emotions under control so my powers don't go overboard. But then, especially after losing her powers, she let loose emotionally and started dressing like a punk with a mohawk, just like in the comics. Forge prepares dinner for her and talks about his time in war when he was a soldier. In the comics, he fought in Vietnam, which, if true here, would make him around 40 years old in the series. This war experience cost him not just a leg and an arm, It also opened the door for the villain, the adversary, who is hinted towards the end of this episode. And the question is, who is he? I'll explain a bit later, but trust me, it gets bizarre. And I kind of hope that they adapt much of this for the show. So they're going for a ride, and the storm does that City of Angels thing. And just like Maggie Ryan's goofy character in that movie, she almost dies. But it makes sense that the storm would be lost at this point. It's probably the closest she's felt to flying after she lost her powers. As I mentioned before, in the comics, they spend the entire issue in Forge's apartment, where he creates holographic projections of nature. She is even uncomfortable with heights and open spaces since she can no longer fly. Now, I wonder if that's happening here as well. Maybe she's never been to a ranch and spent the entire episode inside a holographic simulation. That would explain that ending and the introduction of the opposing villain. But like I said, I'll talk about that later in the video. Let's assume this isn't a holographic projection. The storm going to a ranch is a way for her to reconnect with nature without feeling the need to command it. She may not be able to sense the natural world, but she's becoming more attuned to observing it. We see the previously mentioned photo of the X Factor with Magneto, Quicksilver, Forge, Destructor, Polaris, Strong Guy, Wolfsbane, and the Multiple Man. And remember, the X-Men confronted this team in the episode called Frosty Comfort. The Forge attempts to fix the storm, but their first attempt fails, just as it does in the comics. The summoning she uses is similar to the first time we saw her use her powers in the original episode. Quotes, "Wind, heed my command, messenger of the elements, command the release of this child," end quotes. And again, this traces a crucial similarity between the two stories in episode 4. Both Jubilee and Storm are trying to relive the glory days of the original series, but they must learn to evolve and grow. After all, that's what a mutation is, evolution and growth. It's like a poetry of life. On the Forge wall, we can see the year X93, the year the X-Men debuted, and the first issue of X-Men. Here's also the best pancake recipe, referring back to the pancakes he made for breakfast in the original Life and Death comic. Significantly, there's a photo showing Forge with Dr. Adler. This Dr. Adler was a scientist who was renting out a lab on Muir Island, home of Xavier's ex-girlfriend, Moira McTaggart, who is also a scientist. At that time, Adler was experimenting on a cure for mutants, a way to strip away their powers. There was a whole saga where a vampire nearly got hold of the cures. So in this episode, we learned that Adler's technology was actually adapted from the original designs of Forge. It's worth noting here that we never actually saw the real Dr. Adler in the original series. We saw Mystique impersonating Adler while she was working for Apocalypse. Apparently, Mystique killed and replaced Adler before he could invent a cure, because Apocalypse then upgraded his equipment with a device that would enhance a mutant's powers and thereby make him invincible. And that's precisely what happens to Archangel in the episode Come the Apocalypse. Apocalypse originally developed the virus that BB-8 contracts in the comics, so I'm wondering if he could end up being the secret villain of this season, the guy behind Mr. Sinister. But there is in fact an even more wicked villain in this photo they took care to cover. That person next to Forge is X-Men villain Bastion, also known as Sebastian Gilbert. Now, Bastion was the leader of Operation Zero Tolerance, an event in the comics where the government employed Sentinels to hunt down and kill all mutants. Now, Bastion, in fact, is not human. He was secretly a combination of the mind of the Master Mold and the advanced mutant Nimrod, who we saw in the Days of Future Past episodes. So why is Forge in this picture with Bastion? Well, this implies that Forge also had a role in the creation of the original technology of the Sentinels. Boy, he's like the Thomas Middleton Jr. of the mutant species. The idea of Forge playing a part in the creation of the Sentinels is ironically bitter, considering he spends his twilight years battling these sentinels in a dystopian future. Then, Forge drops a significant revelation. The Department of Defense extended an offer of assistance, hopeful he would aid them in building potentially mutant neutralizing devices. Now, in the comics, it came as quite the shock to Storm when the truth surfaced that the weapon which had taken away her powers was an invention of Forge. He didn't merely brainstorm the idea of the technology as it operates in the original series, he physically made the weapon under a government contract. In the comic books, Storm and Forge fall in love, and he finds himself unable to forgive his own guilt for causing her pain. In the series, within 20 minutes, Forge confidently declares his love. I have to admit that seemed rather prompt for belief. Then, after this reveal, the Storm rides to the plains and falls just like she does in Forge's apartment when the holograms disorient her. Except this time she falls back into the ranch house, which, like I said, could be a hologram, or this could be demonic magic. Notice when Forge sees this monster, he immediately says, "Get out of my house, you damn demon." So how did he know it was a demon? Well, I'm going to explain what happened in the comics, just the main points, because this is a very long and strange story. In the comics, when the Forge unit is attacked in Vietnam, it invokes a Native American incantation to help it survive. And this brings this spirit called the Adversary into the real world. The Adversary, over the years, impersonates different people in Forge's life, eventually convincing Storm to assassinate Forge, and the pair are transported to a kind of alternate land where they are alone, like in a pocket dimension. In this world, Forge and Storm fall in love again, and Forge is able to restore Storm's powers. Now, while all of this is happening in Dallas, the Adversary takes over the Forge department and is about to destroy all of reality. Then the X-Men attack the Adversary and die, sacrificing their lives on live television. Afterward, a cosmic being gives them the power to return to life, but keeps their resurrection a secret so they can attack their hidden enemies. As part of all this, they can no longer be seen by security cameras. That set up a really long arc where the mansion was destroyed and the X-Men made a new headquarters in Australia and elsewhere. To give you an idea, for a little while there was no functional team. This era coincided with the story in Inferno, which was adapted in episode 3. Like, I wouldn't even mind seeing long arcs this season where the X-Men aren't even a team anymore, where they're dismembered, disoriented, or traveling the world far from the X-Mansion. Or there's a totally different possibility here. The Adversary is voiced by the same actress who voices Storm, Allison C. Smith. In the comics, in Life and Death, Part 2, Storm is in Africa, where she is bitten by a venomous snake that causes hallucinations. So, we might be seeing a version of that happening here. Or maybe Ford's machine is working, but it's also stimulating a still dormant part of her, the raw mutant power in her mutant genes. And that's manifesting itself within her, right? From her mind, in the figure of a demon. Crazy, right? Leave your ideas and questions in the comments. I'd love to talk about the subjects of the video. If you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. Indications of the next videos are appearing up here now. It makes perfect sense for you to watch them. I'll see you in the next video. See you later.